Hey guys, my name is Dave Durante. Today we're going to be breaking down the handstand. When I work with people with handstands, one of the things that I see quite a bit is that people focus only on one aspect of a handstand. And I like to think of a well-rounded handstand as this triumvirate, where strength, position, and stability are all worked on in their own specific needs. The goal here with all of these progressions is to help understand where your biggest limitation is. So it's not to be working on all of these things and addressing all of them equally, it's more to be targeted in your approach. Is my strength fine? Great, that means we need to be spending more time on position and stability. Can I stay up there for 30 seconds, no problem, away from the wall, but my position is in a big back arch? That means I need to be spending more time on the positional component. Address your individual needs a little bit more specifically so that you can become more targeted in your approach. All of this is a big puzzle. The more we can think about these individual puzzle pieces and then bring it back together, will allow you to build that well-rounded handstand that we want to see. So the next little demo I'm going to show you is an evolution of a handstand. This is going to be about 3 different types of handstand positions, some that you might be accustomed to seeing yourself do, and we'll slowly start to work towards what we ideally want to be thinking about. The first in this evolution is going to be an inefficient handstand, where the head is out, elbows are bent, legs are bent all over the place, a lot of things going wrong here. That will slowly develop into what I call an old school handstand. Old school handstand is much stronger through the elbow, where you're resting on your skeletal structure, but there's still significant arch in my lower back. This arch position actually is something we want to try to avoid, and slowly it'll start to address being in a fully stacked handstand position will be our position number 3. Getting everything to be in one nice line, feet, knees, hips, shoulders, elbows, hands in one straight line where we're as upright on our feet as we are on our hands. So as we get a little bit further into this handstand, we always want to be addressing what the setup's supposed to look like. So we want to talk first about setup mechanics and positioning of where the hands go, where the eye line goes, all right? We'll address it from the ground up, working from the hands through elbows, shoulders, hips, knees, and then eventually get to the feet. If we can address it from the ground first, making sure that the hands are aligned, and then slowly make our way up the rest of the body, it will make sure that the structure is fully stacked. Hand positioning. We want to ideally be thinking about shoulder width as our position for proper alignment. Now what we need to understand here is that when we talk about stability of our handstand, the fingers play a very important role with the micro portion of stability, something we'll talk a little bit more about. So ideally what we're looking for is to be able to work towards a position with our hands facing forward, where I like to think about index finger, maybe middle finger facing at 12 o'clock. Also, the other thing that we want to be thinking about with our fingertips is spread those fingers out. The wider the base, the more you're going to be able to control against the ground. The more surface area we have in contact with the ground, the better we're going to be able to control. So try to avoid any handstands where those fingertips together, spread out nice and wide. Eye line, where are we looking? This is actually a very, very important piece to the balance side of a handstand. So ideally, the first thing we want to be thinking about is trying to get our head into a neutral position. Neutral position meaning ears up against shoulders, where everything is in one line. When we're in a neutral head position, what ends up happening is you're going to look way out far in the distance back behind you. Not ideal when you're first learning handstand in terms of finding a balance point. So ideally, yes, we want to be thinking about trying to get the head in line with the shoulder, ear up against shoulder, neutral head. But we're going to be looking at a very fixed point down on the ground that's going to be in line with your thumbs. So ideally, one of the cues I really like to use here is when your hand is firmly planted on the ground, I like to think about corkscrewing down into the ground, trying to feel like you're externally rotating from the shoulder and trying to get the pit of the elbow in line with your thumb to make sure that you're in a position where the elbow is fully locked out. If you're internally rotating from the shoulder, the elbow will slowly start to move away from the body, and your elbow is going to be much more susceptible to a kink, which cause you to collapse. Now this part needs to be spent a little bit more time on because this becomes a very big challenge for most people, and it ends up affecting their overall handstand. So ideally what we're looking for with our shoulder positioning is a shoulder angle that allows us to go to and eventually beyond 180 degrees without compromising hip position. So we have to address some of the limiting factors here. Shoulder positioning in terms of shoulder mobility is one of those factors. Most people focus too much on just what the shoulder is doing, and they don't focus enough on what the T-spine limitations look like, as well as the soft tissue of the underarm. When we talk about lats, we talk about teres, we talk about tricep, as well as pec and bicep play a role here in being able to get to and beyond that 180 degrees. So if you are limited from a soft tissue perspective, it's going to play a huge role in what your positioning of your handstand looks like at a higher level. And what we're trying to do here is get into a position of that hollow, something you've probably heard before. What does that hollow position actually entail? I don't want you to over-exaggerate this, and this is one of the most common misconceptions or problems that we see with people trying to engage their hollow. They end up over-exaggerating and end up creating a pike position. So being here, an angle at the hips, as opposed to creating that pelvic tilt in a more flat back position, as opposed to creating an angle. So the cue we like to be thinking about here is rolling the hips under, squeezing the bottom part of your butt, and trying to roll your butt into your belly button. If we can work through that aggressive arch into that hollow, understanding those two opposing actions and understanding where that hollow position ends, it will allow us to eventually apply it to our handstand a little bit more effectively. Now the strength side of things is something that you guys are probably already spending time on, but we want to have a little bit more of a targeted approach when it comes to strength training. What we want to be thinking about is spending time under tension with a little bit more purpose. So instead of just kicking upside down and hoping for the best, we want to be doing it in a way that allows us to make sure that we're tracking our progress. So I'm going to give you some fun games and tools that I like to think about in terms of being able to see where I am right now, using it as a 0 point, and then building towards that strength where it becomes actually a position of strength. Well, the first one I like to do is called a doubling game. So a doubling game starts at a 7.5 second hold and has an equal amount of rest. And then it builds towards a 15-second hold and a 15-second rest. Then 30-second, 30-second, minute, 2 minute, 2 minute, as long as you can go where you can't hold that amount of time anymore. So ideally, you want to use it as kind of a starting off point. If you're in that 30-second range, this is as long as you can hold, great. But eventually building it to the point where you're getting into the 4, 8, potentially even 16-minute holds. With any of these strength training drills, it's less a priority thinking about position and stability and more just staying upside down for longer periods of time. So if you're not at a place yet where you can actually stabilize your handstand, use the wall. Get upside down, stomach to wall or back to wall are both valid. Just stay upside down as long as you possibly can and then eventually introduce the stability component away from the wall. A huge factor, one of the things that most people miss out on that I want to make sure is addressed, is breathing patterns when you're upside down for long periods of time. All right, the goal here will be trying to find a breath and a breathing pattern that mimics what you do when you're upright. So if you're used to breathing in through the nose, deep exhale out through the mouth, it's the same pattern that I want you to be thinking about when you're inverted. So ideally what we're doing at first is trying to create this breathing pattern in a simpler form, in a plank, at an angled wall hold, or spending short periods of time inverted where all you're thinking about is the breath, and then eventually applying it to longer holds. If you're getting blotches around your eyes or feeling like blood is pooling to your head, it most likely has to do with you trying to hold your breath during that long hold. We have to incorporate a more easy, consistent breath so you can stay up there for longer periods of time. Okay, we're gonna get into the positional side of things now. First part of this is doing it upright, all right? I tell people all the time that you should be working on handstands every single day, but working on handstands does not necessarily mean that you have to get inverted. You do not have to get upside down. And from a positional side of things, there are tons of things that you can be doing standing up, laying down on the ground, at angles. The first exercise that we'll show here will be something standing straight up, and we'll work on trying to create one straight line from that hand all the way down through our feet. You can do it without anything in your hands, but if you do have a plate or something to push or react against, it's a helpful way to kind of create a connection from your hands down through the rest of your body. So ideally what we're going to be thinking about here is arms staying directly above our head, creating that one nice line through the shoulder, open at 180 degrees, eye line between those thumbs, and you're going to be thinking about rolling the hips under. So squeezing the hips, rolling into that hollow body position, creating a nice tension from those fingertips down through your feet, and then releasing. Again, squeezing the hips, rolling those hips under, nice and tight, creating length throughout the entire body, and then releasing. 10-second holds here. I normally do a 10-second hold and a 10-second release for about 6 rounds. Starting upright is a good place to be thinking about it before you actually apply it into the next version. The next variation here is going to be actually laying prone down on the ground. It will be the same type of position that we were trying to do when we're upright, except now we're going to use the ground as a little bit of a barrier to work against. You'll lay down flat on the ground, arms extended out in front of you. Connection to the lower half is very important here. So again, we're going to try to squeeze very, very tight from our fingertips down through our toes. Feet stay in connection with the ground and heels stay together. The biggest misconception or the challenge here with most people is that once they can't see their legs anymore, they disregard them. Your legs are still a part of the exercise. We want to make sure there's a connection from our hands all the way down through our feet. So the feet will stay together, squeezing those heels as tight as you possibly can, making sure the heels stay flat, rolling the hips under into that hollow body position, and lastly, trying to think about driving the armpits down towards the ground to create that open shoulder angle that we want to see. One nice straight line throughout the entire body. Again, 10-second, nice and contracted, 10-second relax, 6 rounds. So the next part of our positional drills is going to be a sequence that we're going to build. We went from the ground, and now we're going to create an angled wall hold. So we'll be facing the wall. Hands should be a distance away from the wall that allows you to create a 45-degree angle. The objective here is to try to create one nice straight line from your hands down on the ground all the way through to those toes up against the wall. I don't want to see any angles from the shoulder or any piking from the hips. So if you let those feet drive up the wall and elongate the body, it's going to help create that one nice line that we're trying to achieve. With the angled wall holds, what we'll try to do is hold 20 seconds, rest as much as you need, make sure you're nice and fresh, another 6 rounds. Now, building on this sequence, from our angled wall hold, the next part is going to be a 7 position. Now, 7 position is going to be extremely challenging, but it's going to be very, very important in terms of a high-level handstand. So the goal first is going to be to make sure that we have the correct distance away from the wall with our hands, creating the 45-degree angle to start. The feet will slowly start to drift down the wall as best you possibly can. As the feet drift down, the hips will start to push over your shoulders, over your hands, eventually getting to a position where we have a 90-degree angle at the hip, where the legs are out horizontal, the torso is vertical, and we are in one nice 7 position up against the wall. So what this position is going to do is going to put you in a position where you're a little bit more open in that shoulder angle, potentially even building past 180 degrees, and you will start to feel a shift in activation from the front part of the shoulder more towards the rear side. One additional piece with the 7 position is that this should not be a limiting factor in terms of mobility. So if your hamstrings are very tight or your lower back is very tight and you don't feel like you can get into a position where the body is horizontal from the legs, bend the knees a little bit because our focus point is going to be what's happening more through the torso. With our angled hold into our 7 position, I like to see a 10-second hold in our angle and then a 10-second hold in our 7 position, again 6 rounds. Next part of this sequence, building from your 7 position, is going to be a 1-leg extension. Now again, this is a positional component, so ideally what we're going to be doing is lifting one leg off the wall very slowly, looking for a position with that leg to be completely in line with the rest of the body. Most people will move through this position way too quickly, and their leg will come way past vertical into a very aggressive arch position. Think about coming off the wall as slowly as you possibly can, trying to watch from the side. If you have a partner, if you're filming yourself, watch from the side to try to find a perfectly aligned foot over hip, over shoulder, over hand position. This is going to be very, very important in terms of slowly starting to build the disconnect between what you think your body is doing and what reality is like. Into the final portion of our sequence here, angled wall hold, 7 position, single leg raise, bring it down, single leg raise on the opposing side, 5 seconds at each position, making sure that there's a full 5 seconds, rest as much as you need, make sure you're nice and fresh, another 6 rounds. On the positional side of things, we're going to address a couple of accessory exercises that are going to be helpful, not only for the soft tissue of the underarm, which is one of those limiting factors in being able to get to that fully extended arm position, but also some addressing of the T-spine in terms of how we can get that to be mobile enough to get that position nice and aligned. Okay, the first exercise that we're going to talk here has to do with laying down on the ground. In our prone position, it's going to be a prone raise. So the legs will stay firmly down on the ground. The goal here would be trying to hold on to something. I have to use just a PVC, something light, and we're going to try to raise that PVC off the ground as high as you possibly can with nice straight elbows, with the head down on the ground. I think about having the chin or the nose down on the ground. Don't lift the torso up, otherwise it's creating more of a lower back extended position as opposed to addressing more of the T-spine. This is much more challenging than it seems, especially doing it with straight elbows. Hands should stay in that nice shoulder width position as we do with all of our handstands, and raising as much as you possibly can. If you find that you are limited in how far you can raise here, a couple inches off the ground or maybe not at all, this is an area we need to delve a little bit further into in terms of addressing. One additional drill that we're going to show here in terms of helping to understand how to address some soft tissue issues of the underarm is going to be in a supinated grip. So we'll just hold on to a PVC here, we'll get down onto our knees, we're going to drive our elbows down into the ground. As we drive our elbows into the ground, we're going to be thinking about pushing the armpits down towards the ground as well as tucking the hips under. You're going to feel like you're really trying to pull those scapula and those lats away from each other, and it will be a great exercise to address some of that limitation that we see from the underarms. The stability side of the handstand is something that gets neglected quite a bit, and we want to be addressing the stability in 2 different factors. There's micro stability in your handstand, and there's macro stability in your handstand. Micro stability has to do with the ability of your fingertips to engage against the ground in a very subtle way. It has to do with the subtle adjustments that happen in your handstand, the more detailed portion of the handstand. I always tell people it's like playing piano against the ground. Very, very subtle, small adjustments that come through the fingertips have to do with that micro side. The macro side of your handstand has to do with what your shoulders are doing. So if you're very limited in the range of motion that you have through your shoulders, the ability to stabilize at a higher level will decrease substantially. The more range that you have, the more you're going to be able to stabilize as your weight transfers more drastically front to back. So one of our first exercises when it comes to stability is going to be a plate drill that will start overhead. We'll start overhead with the plate in a position that allows you to be in that shoulder width position. Feet together, squeezing that butt nice and tight so you're thinking about that pelvic tilt. Arms fully extended, trying to get as close to that 180-degree position as possible. The plate will start to shift forward to back back and forth, trying to make sure that we understand how that forearm and how that wrist through the fingertips really starts to engage as we're eventually working through the ground. The plate is a good starting point that you can eventually address when you're fully in your handstand. The next version of the stability drill will have independent weight. It will give you a much better understanding that each hand will be stabilizing against the ground differently. So if your weight is shifted onto one side, if you're fatiguing on one side a little bit more aggressively, you will need to know how to stabilize a little bit more on one side than the other. So if we have independent weight, it's going to allow you to start engaging a little bit more differently between the right and the left. The last of our stability drills here are going to be floater drills. Now, floater drills are going to be using the wall in a much more specific and targeted way. You can be doing this back or stomach to wall. If you're starting out for the first time, I would prefer you to be thinking about back to wall. So ideally, the distance when you're starting out is somewhere between 10 inches and 12 inches away from the wall. It's some distance so you can create a little bit of that leverage into the wall, but not so far away that it's going to be incredibly challenging to pull away. The goal with this particular drill is fingertip engagement. So you're going to dig really aggressively down into the ground, pulling first through your fingertips, then your shoulders, hips, and lastly, your feet will follow. I do not want you to kick away from the wall. It shouldn't be anything aggressive. It should feel that your legs are slowly peeling away from the wall and trying to slowly find a balance point with your feet away from the wall, allowing them to drift back to the wall to reset. This is a very, very subtle drill that again starts from the fingertips and makes its way through the rest of the body. The last variation with our floater is going to be stomach to wall. Stomach to wall is going to be a little bit more challenging. It's going to apply a little bit more positional component because we can stay a little bit more stacked. We're not going to be as severe into that arch. But this one's a little bit more challenging for people that are learning. If you're not comfortable getting into a handstand, a stomach to wall floater can create a little bit of a dangerous situation for you. So only use it if you feel like you're comfortable bailing out of a handstand. Distance away from the wall again will matter. 8 to 10 inches is a good place to start. If you want to start a little bit further away, that's fine. One foot will slowly start to peel away from the wall. As that one foot slowly peels away, what will end up happening is your hips, shoulders will follow that initial leg, and you'll end up finding a little bit more of a balance point. The secondary leg that's up against the wall will just be used as a little bit of a contact point. That second leg will slowly start to peel away from the wall as the weight becomes more stable over the hands. So first leg drifts, hips and shoulders follow over the hands. Try to avoid a really aggressive arch. You don't want to be thinking about leading through the heel. You want to be thinking about the leg hitting a nice vertical position. Then again, your hips and shoulders following. That secondary leg just using as a prop to slowly peel away from the wall as your hands become a little bit more of a stabilized point. So we really want to be thinking about the handstand as this triumvirate, where strength, position, and stability are all worked on in their own specific needs. So the goal with this is to try to figure out what your particular limitations are within your handstand so you can address it a little bit more according to your own specific needs. So my approach with handstands in terms of how we're going to be thinking about this moving forward is I think you can be working on handstands every single day. Now it doesn't need to be more than 10-15 minutes on particular days, and it doesn't even necessarily mean that you have to get upside down. That's a very important caveat to that comment. You do not have to get upside down to be working on handstands. There are very important positional drills. There are tools to be working on the mobility component. There are tools to be working on your hollow body position that you can eventually apply to your inversions. But every day you can be working on either strength, position, or stability. Okay guys, we have all the tools now to get after this, so show me what you got.